Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're listening from the world. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy during these challenging times. My name is Bhavesh Patel, and I'm Vice President of Global Marketing at ASCO Power Technologies, a Schneider Electric business. I'm really excited to host another session of industry webinar, Industry Perspectives, focusing on pharmaceutical industries. I've had the opportunity to present at various conferences, published articles, so that I can continue to add to the body of industry knowledge. And today is another such event to continue building that body of education for a facility's electrical infrastructure. This event was recorded earlier, but we will have live Q&A session, so please start asking us your questions through the questions box. Today, I have the pleasure of discussing pharmaceutical industry electrical infrastructure topic with an industry expert who has lots of experience in this space. It is my privilege to introduce you to Juan Tabon. Juan, welcome to Industry Webinar, Industry Perspectives. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience with a brief background about your work?
I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much, Bhavesh. My name is Juan Tabon, and I'm a core team leader for a multidisciplinary architecture and engineering company. We really focus on projects in and around the pharmaceutical markets. By background, I'm also an electrical engineer, and I've been working in the science and technology, hospitals, biotech, R&D, and pharmaceutical electrical design for facilities for the past 18 years. I've been with CRB for the past 7 years, where my focus has really been on the electrical plus the overall facility design for buildings in the pharma market. So just a quick understanding of what we consider to be the pharmaceutical areas. We consider that to be really the whole product flow. So how does a drug or substance come into the market and then get developed to then become a delivery system? So that starts in research and development. So within laboratories, scientists, they develop drugs, they test them, they go through phase 1 trials, phase 2 and phase 3 trials with approvals from the FDA. Once they get those approvals and they realize there's a market for a drug or substance, they need to scale that up. So that scale up moves away from R&D and more into commercial manufacturing and biologics. So that will get increased into larger doses and larger sums of a drug or a substance, and then that substance, once it's created, needs to go into a delivery method. That could be pills, oral solid dosage, or vaccines with syringes. So we consider that to be the fill-finish markets. At the same time, there are brand new technologies within cell and gene therapy that are becoming very popular right now and are more specialized treatments for patients. So that's a huge gain in the pharma industry, and one of the reasons why the industry is booming right now.
Great. Thank you very much for that great background and exposure to our audience about your expertise. For the audience, our conversation today will focus on 4 broad topics, again related to the pharma industry's electrical infrastructure. We'll speak about COVID and its impact. We'll then address the pharmaceutical facility design strategies. Then we'll touch on the sustainable technologies within the pharmaceutical industry. And then we'll finish off with digitization in the pharmaceutical facilities. So with those 4 broad topics, let me start with the first topic of COVID and its impact on the pharmaceutical industry. So Juan, what changes, if any, have you seen in the pharmaceutical industries as a result of COVID and the subsequent lockdowns?
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of changes and an immediate impact, specifically to the areas that I work in, right? We do facility designs and construction, and I think there's 3 main areas that COVID has affected the industry from my perspective. The first one being really on-site construction, requiring that there's additional cleanings, regular checks, social distancing of workforces, construction workforces actually inside a building, that they need to maintain their separation. You can't just throw 50 people in one area and get it built quicker anymore. You're going to be limited. You need to work on second and third shifts, which adds cost. If there is an infection in the building, the area needs to get shut down and cleared out. People need to really social distance and really be off-site if that were to happen for a period of time. So that's slowed down construction a bit. The second piece has been really equipment arriving on site. Lead times for equipment has been delayed. In general, we have seen longer lead times for large and specialized equipment, things that aren't off the shelf. And there was a bit of a slowdown earlier in the year where the construction had slowed down due to the shutdowns. Once things picked back up, the biomarkets kept going in the meantime, but once things picked back up, inventory on the shelves became much more difficult to have. So it was a lot harder to get product to the job site and to get the equipment to the site that was even off the shelf. So that was really the second immediate impact. But really, I think the overarching impact is the way business is conducted today. Many people have home offices like you and I are right now, instead of being in our normal offices. Warehouse operations have changed. You need to have less people within your building. But if you look at just within the manufacturing space itself, that has not changed too much.
Great. Thanks, Juan, for that great background about the changes in the pharmaceutical industries. So then tell me, as a result of a lot of these things that you mentioned, did the pharmaceutical industry have to either speed up or delay any of their plans?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, we need to think about what changes have we seen in the pharmaceutical industry over the past 15 years, right? They've shifted quite a bit to more of a just-in-time operation and a right-size workforce. And many companies are really focused on operations improvements in lieu of just going to capital projects and expanding. So that's caused utilization in many of the pharma markets and sub-markets to be pretty high, which is good. You're highly efficient. But what it also means is that you have limited capacity for new products without really building a new facility. So that the industry has been shifting overall in that direction. And what COVID has done, it's really the race to the cure and the vaccine. It's putting a serious stress on specifically the fill finish market. That market, I've heard numbers, has been up to 95% utilized. So there's very limited capacity there for expansion. Now you throw in COVID and a vaccine that you want to try to deliver to a large majority of the world's population, there's an issue there, and it's become a disruptor to the industry. So that's one piece. The other piece for trends in the pharma market has been really the advanced therapeutic and medicinal products. So we call that ATMP, also known as cell and gene therapies. This has really taken off in the past 5 years, and these are really highly specialized drugs for treating diseases. That also requires a fill finish component, and it is also requiring a share of that expansion. So combining all these things together has really kind of put a stress on the pharmaceutical market, and the plans to speed up have increased. Everyone wants to be able to deliver their product. They've had projections in the past few years, but at the same time, you have this market disruptor that you're trying to produce to really help people and get that vaccine out there for the world's population. So I think those things together has really caused stress in the market and has really caused everyone to speed up in this market and to keep work moving.
Great. So you touched on the vaccine, and you also touched on some of the other things that the pharmaceutical industry had been working on for a few years. Some of these pharmaceutical players were directly involved in helping develop that vaccine for COVID, whereas others, as you said, were responding to other health concerns. Did this result in any changes to the existing lab or research environment?
Oh, it definitely did. And I think you can see that maybe there's 19 companies right now that are, or even more, that are working for a cure for COVID. Historically, these companies have all worked independently, right, with their own R&D groups, their own manufacturing groups, and their own product deployment groups. What we have seen is the government has actually stepped in a lot and allowed these groups to actually work together. So you can have company A working directly with company B to produce a vaccine. And they're splitting it up in multiple ways. Some are really focused on adjuvants, while others may be focused on the actual vaccine itself, while another company is really focused on the fill-finish operation. How are we going to take that vaccine, mass produce it, and then get it into the syringe and the vials to be delivered to people? So from that standpoint, where people worked previously separate, now they're forced to work together, or they are working together, and it's really benefiting society, and it's one of the reasons why that vaccine is going to be able to be produced so much quicker than normally you would have seen.
Great. That's a great point that you make about the collaboration that's happening in the pharmaceutical industry. Let me touch a little different topic. So power continuity was not a code-mandated requirement in the pharmaceutical industry. Definitely when you compare it to some of the other industry. And it was not across the entire spectrum of the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe there were some elements of the industry that needed to comply with, from a code standpoint, needed to comply with the power continuity needs. Mm-hmm. But the pharmaceutical industry needs power continuity to address the business risk. Like you mentioned, there is a need for speed, there's a need for collaboration because of the capacity. And so the power continuity disruption has a huge impact on business risk. Do you see this power continuity becoming a mainstream requirement in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I think it may be already. I can't tell you any project that I've designed in the past 15 years that hasn't had some sort of backup generator power or UPS power. So that is really a requirement. Now, when you look at the pharmaceutical industry and how it's evolving, it really depends on the methods of operation of each vendor, right? So of each manufacturer. Some manufacturers or some of our clients have very manual operations. However, product is being checked, it's being tested, it's being controlled inside tanks and inside equipment, and that equipment has control systems which need to be maintained, need to have maintained power. At the same time, there's other equipment that will use agitators, that any disruption in that power could actually cause a batch to go bad. And if you look at the cost of a single batch for many of these companies, you quickly justify the need to have backup power and continuous power. And that's not only in the event of a power loss, but it's also in the event of a power restoration, right? So to minimize the amount of blips and faults that people see, sometimes you can't limit it. The utility comes out, but your generators kick on. But you do want to make sure that your transfer switches or your switchboards and your gear can have a closed transition transfers back to normal power. So those pieces are very important to address power continuity, and I think are critical within this industry specifically.
Great. Thank you for that background and the detailed answer, Juan. Yeah. So again, I want to remind our audience that if you have any questions that you want to ask Juan, please start populating them in the questions box of the webinar tool. Let's now move on to our second topic, addressing the pharmaceutical electrical infrastructure design strategies. Mm-hmm. So again, Juan, you mentioned the need for speed, the need for scaling up, the need even to collaborate, which is new ground for the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. So with that as a background, what are some of the key changes in the pharmaceutical facility designs that you have seen in the recent past 7-10 years?
Yeah, so I would say in the past 7 to 10 years, the pharmaceutical industry is really shifting to more of a specialized care, right? You still have the large traditional volumes of doses that have to go out for a flu vaccine or for any other product, whether it be manufacturing of pills for solid dosage. But in specialized care within the advanced therapeutics market, cell and gene therapy is really very important because of those treatments. So the key changes has been really specialized treatment. So it's almost like a hospital, I consider it, right? Where you have a patient who may have cancer, people take those cancer cells and then some of these companies are able to take that specific DNA and produce almost cures for that specific cancer with a very specialized treatment. And that duration of time for when that DNA gets transferred to the facility, gets adapted, and then gets transferred back to the patient is critical. Any disruption in power systems while that treatment is happening is also critical. So for the most part, we're considering a lot of this more like a hospital design, and has led to moving transfer switches downstream and closer to the operation, right? I think if you look at historically power reliability, who does it better than a hospital? Critical care facilities. They have people there that if power's lost, they're subject to loss of life. So using those methods inside the pharma industry are starting to become more popular, and I think that's been really the biggest shift in that industry for power reliability. Bringing those two sources of power as close as you can to the power distribution point, A and B, and as I said earlier, a clean transition of power from generator or have some sort of UPS backup there through your generator system to maintain your power is key.
Okay, good. Thank you for that detailed answer.
Mm-hmm.
So again, staying on the facility topic for a minute, and this might not be related to just pharmaceutical industry, but definitely there is a push in the pharmaceutical industry to either onshore or shorten the pharmaceutical supply chain, right? Because you don't want the raw material coming from a different continent that disrupts the ability and the speed, as you've been focusing on, to respond to whatever the market demands. So because of that push to onshore or shorten the supply chain, how do you see that being addressed by the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I think actually COVID highlighted that for the most, very strongly, because people or product that was being built off seas, then being shipped to the United States, couldn't happen, right? Things couldn't move as easily as they did before. There was a lot more scrutiny in any transfer of systems, and that realization really is pushing more manufacturing to happen within the United States right now. Specifically to that, active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs, as it's known, have really moved into this, and that's another kind of piece of the industry that we are expecting growth in over the next few years. So I see this being addressed by companies investing in manufacturing locally and really focused on expanding their facilities the right way. Also, not just expanding those, but making them more efficient. So continuing usage of operations improvement, simulations, to get the most out of their current facilities. And also, they may not know what's going to happen within their current facility, so designing flexibility into their spaces. So making a space able to operate to manufacture a drug product it can do research, it can do development, it can do cell therapy, and then it can transition to do fill finish in one specific space. That flexibility inherent to design, I kind of see as the way it's moving to be efficient, but at the same time, we're hitting a capacity limit, so we need to kind of be thoughtful of how we do that and grow thoughtfully, essentially.
Great. So it's funny. So you touched on things that kind of, to me, imply that there is vertical integration happening in the pharmaceutical industry more so than before. And maybe it's not from a supply chain or raw material standpoint, but definitely from a control standpoint. At the same time, things that you touched on imply that there is maybe a lot more complexity coming into the pharmaceutical industry, at least in the manufacturing space. So given that background, what is the role and scope of a typical facility manager in the pharmaceutical industry? How do they grow their knowledge and expertise to keep up with all these changes that you touched on?
Yeah, I mean, the role of a facility manager is critical to any facility, right? They need to understand what's going on with the infrastructure, the backbone, and not just electrical systems, but the chilled water systems, the steam production, the WFI, which is a water for injection. All those systems are very complex, and they need to have a deep understanding of that, as well as the actual products and the methods of manufacturing, right? They need to know, is that space safe to go into? How is the air being contained within that room or that environment that they can definitely understand? So there's a lot of information within these areas that facility managers have to be aware of to understand. And I think the best way for them to kind of grow their knowledge and expertise is to get connected in the industry, right? Network. Join ISPE, the International Pharmaceutical Engineering Society. They're excellent, as well as the ASME BPE. Those are some organizations that help create standards. They're always looking for people to help them and write the standards for the United States. The FDA looks to them to help them grow that. So if they can get connected within that industry, that's great. Another thing that they can do is get a Lead Six Sigma certification. So that helps them with understanding how to make things more efficient and improve, and is really very much intertwined with the pharmaceutical industry. And there are a lot of great topics and great certifications that they can get within all these groups. If they do that, they'll definitely be connected in the industry. They'll know what's trending, where facilities are moving to, and they'll grow their knowledge.
Great. So again, from what you're describing, the role of facility manager is definitely going to evolve and will continue to evolve in the coming years as this complexity becomes part of the norm within most industries, definitely in the pharmaceutical industries as well. So you touched on a lot of things that address the spike in demand, that focused on the speed. Obviously, that has been your common theme so far. So to me, then, it seems like demand forecasting becomes a big challenge in the pharmaceutical industry, especially when demand is either weather-related, like there's a bad cold season and how do you address for that, or it's environment-related, like COVID. Mm-hmm. How does the pharmaceutical facility design evolve such that they can scale with demand?
Yeah, so they evolve in a series of ways. I mean, I think to answer your question on how they react to weather-related activities affecting cold season, that's really hard to do. I mean, weathermen have difficulty predicting the weather, let alone you're going to predict when someone's going to get sick or when there's going to be a rush and things aren't on the shelves due to a high cold season because of the weather. That's very difficult to do. Many of the clients that we deal with right now, they are focused on very much understanding the simulations and the way people will react to their drugs. So what I mean to say is the thinking and the foresight that goes into operation improvements and as well as understanding each step of that process flow very specifically. There are data charts and very large sets of data that get inputted, but ultimately the output of your data is only as good as the input of the data you put in, right? I mean, you can go to the internet and search for anything, but you don't know how accurate that might be. So I think really what the key is here is accuracy of the people getting the data, retrieving that data, as well as the people who data mine and go through that information so that they will know how best to affect the product. I mean, I don't think anyone can really predict a COVID situation again. Hopefully that doesn't happen again for another 100 years or hopefully never. But what pharmaceutical companies really like to do is analyze information, analyze data, and not prevent, but be able to pivot it and be at the right point to know when the industry is going to move in a very specific direction so that they're prepared and that they can react to it appropriately. There's a strong demand for a product or a drug where they predict that that's going to be because that's what the data tells them. Then that's what they'll move the manufacturing to. And really the proof is in the pudding, right? Once that happens and once the product sells and they hit their projections right on point, they'll know, hey, they have a good track record and they'll want to keep that going in the future. So having good data, analyzing it correctly, really will help scale with demand.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying the pharmaceutical industry is no different than any other industry. Everybody wishes they have a crystal ball, but there is nothing like a crystal ball. Again, I want to remind our audience that if they have questions they want to ask Juan during the live Q&A sessions, please start putting them down in the questions block of this webinar tool. Let's now move on to our third topic of sustainable technologies in the pharmaceutical industries as it pertains to electrical infrastructure. So Juan, since you have had a lot of experience, long tenure of experience in different facets of the pharmaceutical industry, how invested is this industry when it comes to sustainable technologies? And do they lead in this industry with sustainable, or would they follow if they were to play a role?
Yeah, so to answer that question, in the past, like when sustainability was first really becoming a very important topic, I mean, it's always been, but I think maybe around the year 2010, it started to become even more and more prevalent in certain industries and facilities and buildings with the advent of LEED. The pharmaceutical industry maybe didn't historically jump on that opportunity right away. They were aware of it. However, in the past 5 years, every major company that's out there definitely has a sustainability division, and it's very important to them. So while not historically leading it, they're definitely pushing for it right now. And I think the momentum that has caused within the industry has really helped drive it and help drive sustainability requirements and really help to lower the carbon footprint of the industry as a whole. I think there was low-hanging fruit in the beginning, right? Replacing fluorescent lighting with LED lighting, adding VFDs to motors. Those type of things happened right away. I think right now what we're seeing is that energy codes are really also helping to push it. And it's important for these sustainability initiatives in the industry for companies to know how they're going to react to those requirements. For example, many times within air systems and HVAC systems, you'll have airflow that's once through to keep spaces clean. Well, that energy is you're taking air directly from the outside, untreated, and pushing it right into your space. So you need to try to capture some of that energy before exhausting it just back out to the space. So adding glycol loops or enthalpy and energy wheels without creating any cross-contamination streams has been one of the cruxes of how we do this. So that requirement is actually pushing new technologies in sustainability, and it's actually helping to create new solutions to an industry where it didn't require those solutions before. So, it's easy to kind of mix the air up if you're going to put it back in, but if that air needs to be clean and that space needs to be clean, then you got to try to figure out different ways to capture the energy without crossing the airstream. So that's one example of sustainability and how it's grown.
Yeah, so it seems like they, in some cases, lag, but in other cases may even lead the sustainable conversation. So along those same lines then, historically, a diesel generator has always been used as a backup power. Again, primarily compliance-driven, because diesel was, for the longest time, the only technology that could ramp up to full capacity in 10 seconds, which was a requirement in the hospital space that you touched on earlier. So diesel has always been used, but now natural gas is starting to gain some kind of a traction. Mm-hmm. Some of that traction is coming from a sustainable viewpoint. Others could also be playing a role in that transition or at least consideration of natural gas. Do you see this happening in the pharmaceutical industry as well?
I see natural gas generators really at the start of every project. And I think to answer this question, we need to understand what that specific client might be looking for, right? We're really speaking in generalities here. But if we're looking to do some sort of demand response for a facility and at the same time have generation power for that, then if you're going to put a diesel generator in that requires scrubbers and a bunch of other equipment to make sure it's clean because it's going to be running on a daily basis, then yeah, just shift to natural gas generator. It's going to be much cleaner and much more sustainable. But if your intent of your generator is really to back up your system in the event of a utility failure, and I think we also have to recognize where the pharmaceutical market is in the United States. I mean, it's definitely spread across the entire United States, but I think it's really concentrated on the eastern seaboard, namely really ranging from the Boston area down to North Carolina or so. So the majority of that is in that area. And I think if you take a step back and look from space, you're going to see at night, right? You see those NASA charts that show, yeah, there's a lot of connectivity over on this side of the country. And on the West Coast, of course, right? And I think there's a lot of pharmaceuticals over there. So the connectivity of those systems really really drive to how reliable your power is. So now, when you're looking at reliability of your electrical system as part of your infrastructure, specifically to the generator now, comparing natural gas to diesel, and it's only going to operate a few hours a year, there's going to be a big cost difference between diesel and natural gas. And a lot of times that cost difference in itself and actually physical dimension of that difference has really driven us to really more of a diesel generator in the past. So not always the case, right? You do have spaces, but I've also seen where insurance companies have come in and viewed diesel energy as being more reliable than natural gas. In the event that there's ever a seismic incident or a limitation on resources out there, these pharmaceutical companies, they want to be able to control or have good control as to how they operate and how they produce. And having that on-site storage of fuel is critical for that. So thank you.
Good. Again, great insights. Thanks, Juan, for sharing your experience and your thoughts. I want to again remind our audience, if they have a live question to ask of Juan, please start putting them into the questions block of the webinar tool. Let's now move on to our fourth topic and touch on digitization in the pharmaceutical industry, and also kind of touch on Internet of Things. So one, digitization is growing everywhere, right? I mean, just the fact that we're having this conversation is a proof of digitization. And so it is growing everywhere. It has allowed for that timely and efficient management of electrical infrastructure, all infrastructure, but today we want to focus our chat on electrical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So how is digitization viewed within the pharmaceutical industry, and how could it evolve in that industry?
So I think we look at historically automation, instrumentation, and control systems, they're critical, right? You need to be able to repeat results. So having that repeatability, and nothing does repeatability better than a computer, right? So very early on, automation systems are embedded into the pharma industry, whether it be checking levels on tanks, opening, closing valves, monitoring temperatures, just controlling the whole infrastructure of any given process. Now, if we look to where automation is going and digitization in the future, we see what we refer to as Industry 4.0. Other people call it Digital 4.0. It's more of an augmented reality where you can kind of see where things are trending, right? You'll be able to predict when a gear is going to go bad, when a component is going to go bad in a system due to number of run times and number of operations. Getting that information out and getting it to a reporting board so that you can schedule a shutdown appropriately to operate and to maintain and replace that component is really the way the industry is trending. So also, as I said, augmented reality is to be able to put on a pair of glasses and or your pad and walk through and see what's going on the inside of this machine without actually opening the machine and exposing yourself to arcs. Having that communication of controls, right to the screen in front of you without putting yourself in danger is great. So that is really on the forefront, and I see it really moving in that direction in the next few years.
So you touched on augmented reality. You touched on the data side of things. In that same vein, concepts like Internet of Things, which has this huge data collection and management associated with it, that can result into artificial intelligence. It needs special kind of expertise to truly benefit from that capability. Now, pharmaceutical industry, and again, this debate is also playing out today with this COVID vaccine. Pharmaceutical industry historically needs lots of real-life data before certifying their products, again, due to the life safety impact. Right. So the predictive elements that come with artificial intelligence and even Internet of Things could be something different, something new, something, I don't want to say unique, but that's something different from the norm within the pharmaceutical industry, at least as it pertains to the product launch. Mm-hmm. So that's the DNA of that industry. Could that DNA limit pharmaceutical industry adopting concepts like Internet of Things, taking advantage of artificial intelligence, at least as it pertains to the electrical infrastructure?
Yeah, I think as it pertains to electrical infrastructure, they're very much going to take those concepts, and I've seen many companies take those concepts that they use within that manufacturing space and spread it out over the broadness of a facility, right? So taking the concept of preventative maintenance for a component or a gear for an operation for process and saying, okay, well now I want to do that for my circuit breaker, right, in my switchgear. How does that circuit breaker and my main equipment or my transfer switch, how can that communicate back to my BAS system so I can at the same time monitor that? We've had quite a few projects in the past where that has been the case, and that digitization is being taken place. I think the DNA is there, right? So it's embedded in that company. I think the hard part, though, is with anything is understanding which pieces of information you're going to transfer, right? Within any given piece of electrical equipment, you could have hundreds of components, thousands of components that are all monitored and that can all give information. Well, you might not need all that information. You really might need to identify what those critical pieces are. So once again, going back to the DNA, these pharmaceutical companies have a lot of health, safety, environmental ways. They do job hazard analysis. They do HazOps. They run methodically what are the risks and how do we identify those risks. So transferring that way you operate of risks into your support system and your infrastructure system, right? It's your backbone. It's part of it. It's all part of the DNA, and it's critical to maintaining facilities and keeping facilities up and running so that you're not shutting down an entire facility to replace a circuit breaker, right? You can, or your equipment's not breaking in while you're operating, right? You're doing that during the times of scheduled shutdowns, whether it be on Christmas Day or New Year's Day, when those things have to happen because those are the only times that things can happen. So if you can schedule that ahead of time, know that this is when I need to do it, and treating it more for not just, like I said, your process base, but also the infrastructure that feeds into that. It's really moving in that direction, and I see that continuing to increase in the next 5 to 10 years.
Great. Again, thank you very much, Juan, for sharing a lot of your thoughts, your experience, your background, especially the specific background and expertise that you have within the pharmaceutical industry. Let's now take this conversation to the live portion of the webinar. Again, audience, if you have not done so yet, please start putting your questions that you want to ask of Juan in the questions block, and we will see you in the live session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Once again, I'm Bhavesh Patel, Vice President Global Marketing at ASCO Power Technologies. And I also have live with me Juan Tabon, whom you've been hearing so far. He's the core team leader of pharmaceutical team at Clark, Richardson, and Biscup, based in Maryland. Hi, Juan.
Hello, Bhavesh. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we have many live attendees and have a long list of questions that some of you have asked. So I encourage you to continue populating more as I start asking one of your questions. So Juan, let's immediately get into the audience questions. So the first one, it seems, pertains to the power continuity comments you made, but has a little different twist to it. The question is, are there any processes that were recently deployed in the pharmaceutical industry which must require power continuity?
Yeah, and I mean, the answer to that is yes, for sure. And within the pharma industry, there's separate markets, and each one has its own really reason as to what requires and why it requires power continuity. The first I would say is in the fill finish market would be the robotics equipment. So the highly specialized mechanics, electromechanics to fill vials and to fill syringes with equipment needs to have a continuous stream of power via UPS power, and any disruption to that operation is detrimental to producing the quantities that have to be produced on a daily basis. And there's time limitations and temperature limitations on a lot of the material that gets placed inside those vials and syringes. So that's one. The second piece the second market I would state is the oral solid dosage market. So manufacturing of pills. You're not supposed to call them pills, but in that industry, but that delivery mechanism, and that is really moving to a continuous operation. So nonstop, really, from the raw materials being placed on one side and on the other side getting the product. Historically, that has been a multiple series of steps. There's been blending and mixing and transferring from one room to another. Air classifications have been very critical in those applications. That's moving now towards a continuous stream. So essentially a large piece of equipment or series of rooms, a ballroom, where raw material can be placed on one side and you output product on the other side. So that operation will need to maintain continuity, and there are several manufacturers out there that are moving to production in that manner. And then the third market that I would say is, once again, the ATMP market that uses autologous products, essentially, which is specialized patient care that I mentioned during the presentation. And that patient care is really critical to making sure that the operations and the growth of those cells for the treatment are maintained in a very clean and environment, and to power continuity to maintain that environment is also critical. So to answer your question, yes, it's definitely moving in that direction. It's not moving in the opposite direction as these things become more, or these treatments become more specialized.
Good. Thanks, Juan.
Yep.
The next question is related to the regulatory compliance issue, and good chunk of our audience deals with compliance type topics, so I can understand why they're asking this question. So the question is there any regulatory change coming into the pharmaceutical industry, especially as it pertains to those continuous operations or those critical operations that you were touching on, that the industry is preparing for?
Yeah, there are.
The subsequent question, let me just ask you the second question, follow up to that basic question about regulatory change, is how would that change, whatever change there might be, would impact the electrical infrastructure?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So there are definitely changes. I mean, the regulations are continuously updated by the FDA. Now, with some of these newer specialized treatments, so previously a lot of the spaces where work was done happened in a location where people needed to be gowned properly. You had to go through a series of airlocks to go into a room to work on a product. And the question is, were you protecting the product from the people, or the people from the product? Sometimes it was either or, sometimes it was both. So a lot of the movement or the changes that we're seeing are trying to, instead of making the entire space be a clean room, try to minimize the size of that clean room because of the amount of air changes that have to happen in a room, right? To maintain clean air, there's a lot of energy that goes into the HVAC system design to move air through those large rooms. So if you can limit the size of those rooms to an isolator or to a much smaller space, then you're going to save energy. But what that does is it requires much more specialized and smaller equipment that has a lot more robotics, is a lot more automated. So the regulations are moving to limit or to change the approach of how we did things. So instead of the entire room being required to be a clean room, now it's a much smaller space, so you can declassify that clean room. So regulation changes are going to ideally declassify some of those outer spaces so people don't need as much gowns, and they're working through equipment on the products that they're working on. So that would be like an isolator technology. So thereby making that system smaller, your HVAC flow becomes smaller, but you're increasing robotics. And then by the advent of adding that robotics and that specialized electronic equipment, power continuity is much more critical, because a loss of power for a robotic piece of equipment could mean the loss of a batch, or the loss of having a process operate in a very specific manner, moving from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So that impact would mess up your operation. So you'd want to keep that power going. So that's how it would affect the infrastructure, by requiring more power continuity.
Good. Thanks again, Juan.
Yep.
The next question, there's a couple of adjacent topics, but let me just ask each of these questions separately. Mm-hmm. So the first question is focusing on power storage. So the question is, are pharmaceutical companies starting to incorporate battery storage into their facility designs to increase resiliency?
So I think the answer to this question depends on where your facility is really located. On the East Coast, it's a very well-connected electrical infrastructure network, right? The power distribution systems there's a lot of cities near each other, a lot of power plants near each other on the East Coast. Whereas on the West Coast, things may be a little bit further apart. There might be more overhead distribution, overhead lines, and a natural disaster like a fire could definitely impact that. And where that happens, you'd want to move your power supply to as close to your facility as possible. Now, I'm going to throw something else in here is with regards to the movement away from fossil fuel burning technology. A lot of the clients that we deal with have initiatives to go away from natural gas and coal burning power. So they're looking to purchase or to put in a lot of solar grid or solar power farms, either at their facility or put them remote and pay for that electricity. So I think we are going to see a large push in that direction as more solar and natural energy is created that lends itself more towards having those pockets of on-site storage and on-site supply of energy. But I think it also depends on where you're located. If you're like on the East Coast, I feel like it's probably going to be a bit longer to see that come into play. the West Coast is more than likely going to be seeing it over the next few years.
Okay. And then there is an adjacent question. So let me ask in the same vein. The question is, does pharmaceutical industry embrace concepts like microgrids?
Yeah, so microgrids, I would say, I consider that to be the on-site power storage. So it's really depending on where you are. So yeah, for those companies on the West Coast, I do see them moving to more of that power grid movement, and eventually, you know, we want to move away from those fossil fuels. So I do see microgrids and coming into play, and the pharma industry at this point, I can't say on the East Coast has embraced it wholeheartedly, but similar to I guess LEAD and some of those other energy initiatives, once it becomes a norm and they decide to do it, they will have a strong impact on that.
Okay. Now I know you touched in the previous question, you touched on clean environment, and so there is a question related to that topic. So clean environment has been a mainstream requirement pretty much in the entire pharmaceutical industry. And yeah, maybe certain areas it's more critical than others, but that's a broad environment requirement. Now, due to COVID, it seems like this clean environment is a need in most all walks of life, right? And right now it's more important. Maybe in the future it might have less of an intensity, but it definitely does not seem like it's going to go away. So the question is, what can we leverage from pharmaceutical industry's experience for the other industries to benefit from?
Yeah. So if you look at a pharmaceutical facility and you separate it into the manufacturing space and the office space and the warehousing space, if you look at how COVID has affected a lot of the designs that we're working on today, the manufacturing space hasn't really changed, right? It's been pretty consistent. So we've taken a lot of those concepts of people movement and how people interact with each other, as well as how the air systems operate within that manufacturing space, and move that into the office area and into really everyday life at this point. So I'd break that down into two areas, right? So like for an office space or for a normal operation, I'd break it into like how, as I said, how the people operate and how the air systems operate in that space, because that's how COVID has affected us. Is really it gets distributed through the air. So from an HVAC standpoint, and we would want to have unidirectional airflow in an office space. Previously, we had, you know, a ceiling plane where air would be distributed via supply diffusers located sporadically in a space, and then return through diffusers also in the ceiling. So it's a very turbulent airflow. What we want to do is then we want to create a unidirectional airflow. So have air come down from the ceiling and then move across the space to maybe low wall returns on a separate wall to go back into that ceiling. We'd want to increase filtration, so have better filtration of the air system. So the supply air coming into the space as well as the return air going back, increase those filters from like a MERV 3 to maybe a 4, even up to a 14. We also want to increase the amount of outside air being allotted in the space. So a lot of these offices use a lot of recirculated air to keep energy costs low. So increasing the amount of airflow into the space helps keep the air cleaner, but it also has the adverse effect of requiring more energy. You know, you need larger motors to treat more air and to run more air through coils. So we'd have to use different mechanisms for treating that air. Also, sorry, you're gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So also within that airstream and the way the air moves, you'd want to have focused UV cleaning. So whether that be having a UV light inside the air handler itself or placing these recirculating ultraviolet air units throughout the space to circulate the air. That's another option within those office spaces. So it's really, and all these technologies have been used in manufacturing spaces. So we're really just moving them from that manufacturing space into the office environment or the warehouse environment for a lot of these facilities. So that's from the HVAC side. Then from the people side or the architecture side of things, increased cleaning, limiting shared services, de-densifying your workspace. So an area where 10 people used to work might only sit 5, right? So separating people via social distances. Creating perceived walls with furniture. So instead of having to actually build a wall and separate everyone, people might feel isolated. You can use furniture systems or high cubicle wall partitions to separate them, or use some sort of plexiglass so that we can still see each other. Also implementing like a hands-free technology for automated doors. So instead of everyone operating a door or hitting a door, have a hands-free wave to operate that door. And then really it's just designing in flexibility where possible. So what I mean by that is allowing the space to move from a non-pandemic mode into a pandemic mode. So one day, that there might be low cases or the state might be very open. People could have a higher density in that office space, but if there's a high amount of cases that come up, you want to be able to quickly change that space from a type 1 to a type 2. So you increase your outside air. So having the control systems in place to allow for that flexibility to switch between that pandemic and non-pandemic mode. So those are things of the technologies we can leverage.
Thank you very much, Juan. So as I was hearing you explain the background and the details about the clean environment and all that, another question came to my mind. So, you kind of were explaining how you need to strike the right balance between, say, efficiency and cleanliness. Are concepts like LEED and all these other efficient building plans and strategies incorporating some of these thinking that you shared just now?
So LEED would be an energy efficiency. So I mean, I think historically the industry initially wasn't really pushing towards LEED. I mean, when LEED first came out, over the years we realized, yes, we have to adapt, and then there's been like a big push to really do better energy wise, and to create better technologies to lower our overall carbon footprint and to lower our energy usage. So these technologies, whereas may not have been like the initial idea, but have come out as a result of trying to create energy efficiency inside that manufacturing space, right? For example, when we talk about like enthalpy wheels or energy wheels, as I mentioned in the presentation, that technology of moving air from the return air that's exhausted from a space into the supply air and moving that energy without mixing the airstream can now be transferred from the manufacturing space into the office space. And that can be done via an air-to-air heat exchanger that doesn't allow airstreams to cross, or through like a glycol loop system that also works that way. So there's some of these technologies that originally came from LEED manufacturing have now pushed us have now come back full circle and now are being moved back into the office space, I think, due to COVID.
Very good. Thank you. So this brings us to the end of this innovation webinar, Industry Perspectives for Pharmaceutical Industry. Juan Tabon, thank you very much again for your detailed and insightful responses to mine as well as the audience questions. And thank you again for taking the time from your busy schedule to share your thoughts with our industry audience. Thanks to everyone for your continued support in ASCO Power Technologies Innovation Webinar Series. We host our events on regular basis, so please visit our website, ascopower.com, to learn about future events. We look forward to seeing you again in our future events. Stay safe and stay healthy. We now end today's event. Goodbye.